The dessert was quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that made your skin itch and your thoughts turn dark. It was the kind of silence that swallowed the world whole, where the sun beat down like a hammer on the back of your neck, and buzzards circled, just far enough to not be a threat. Yet, Cowboy Mickl had chosen a spot under a leaning Joshua tree. The hard earth made digging slow, but that suited him just fine. He wasn't in a hurry. His worn boots stood firm as he gripped the shovel and thrust it into the dirt for the 100th time. Sweat dripped down his temple and into his beard, and his fingers were raw from the labor. The pit before him was almost wide enough, almost deep enough. He stopped and leaned on the handle. "No one's gonna do this for me," he muttered. He had nothing left, no cattle, no kin, no land to speak of. His last horse had limped off 2 days ago, and the only thing he had more of than dust was regret. That morning, he had written a note with a charcoal nub on the back of an old whiskey label, folded it up, buried it in a canteen next to a mesquite branch at the edge of the grave. That was going to be it. He looked up at the sky-burnt orange with the weight of noon and closed his eyes. Then he heard it, a crunch, faint, like footsteps on gravel. He opened his eyes and whipped around, heart punching against his ribs. There was no one there at first, just the wind moving dust across the plain, but then movement. 2 shapes stepped out from behind a cactus thicket not 20 paces from where he stood. Barefoot, dusty, wide-eyed at the boys, Mickl froze, shovel halfway to falling from his hand. They couldn't have been older than 9 or 10. One wore a torn shirt and overalls with one strap missing. The other had a blanket wrapped around his shoulders like a cloak, his face gaunt but calm. Neither of them spoke. Mickl narrowed his eyes. "Where in the blazes did you come from?" The taller one didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head toward the grave Mickl had been digging. "You dyin', mister?" the boy asked, voice steady as a man's, but soft like wind through dry grass. Mickl looked down at the hole. He hadn't told a soul. There shouldn't have been anyone for miles. "That your concern, boy?" he asked, more confused than angry. The younger one stepped forward, eyes big and black as coal. "If you're gonna go, can we have your boots?" Mickl stared. "Lord Almighty," he whispered, almost to himself. "What in tarnation?" The wind shifted again, and suddenly Mickl wasn't sure if he was dead already. Maybe he'd fallen into the hole, and this was some strange afterlife. But the older boy bent down, picked up a stone, and tossed it into the pit. It landed with a dull thud. "Real enough. We've been walking a long way," the boy said, gaze never leaving Mickl. "Ain't eat in a while. We seen buzzards circlin'. Figured maybe there's something left to scavenge." "Scavenge," Mickl barked, taking a step back. "You the vultures." The boys looked at each other, then back at him. "No, sir," said the older one. "We're survivors." Silence again. Mickl looked from the grave to the boys, and something deep inside him twitched, something he thought was long dead. "Got names?" he asked after a long moment. The taller boy hesitated. "I'm Eli," he said. "This here's my brother, Jonah." "And where's your folks?" Eli stared. "Gone." Mickl nodded slowly. He understood the weight of that word. He leaned on the shovel, breathing deep. His grave could wait. For the first time in weeks, something stirred in the stillness. Hope, or trouble, maybe both. The desert sun leaned toward the west, casting long shadows across the pit that was meant to be a grave. But now, 3 figures stood around it, none speaking. Mickl stared at the boys, unsure whether he was caught in some fever dream. Maybe it was the heat, maybe it was guilt. But Eli and Jonah were still there, solid, dust-covered, real as the calluses on Mickl's hands. He cleared his throat and moved toward a rock where his saddlebags lay. "Ain't got much," he muttered, "but if you're hungry." The boys didn't wait for permission. Eli helped his younger brother to the shade, their bare feet puffing little clouds from the sand. Mickl handed over a cracked tin cup and poured the last of his water from the canteen. They passed it between them like it was holy. Jonah gulped, coughed, then giggled just a small, strange sound that punched Mickl right in the gut. "I had a little brother once," Mickl said quietly. "Didn't laugh like that. Always serious. Died from fever for he turned 6. Eli looked up, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "We ain't laughin' 'cause it's funny," he said. "Just feels good not to be dyin'." Mickl sat on a stone and nodded, silently cursing the world for making kids talk like old men. Out of his saddlebag, he pulled a small wrapped biscuit, the last of his food. It was hard, nearly fossilized from days of heat, but it was something. He broke it in half and gave one piece each to the boys. They devoured it in silence, chewing slow as if savoring every flake. "You boys alone out here?" Mickl finally asked. "No one looking for you?" "No, sir," said Eli. "We came from the rail camp past Dry Fork. Mama worked the wash tents. One night, some riders came through, shut the place up, took what they wanted. We ran." Mickl's jaw tightened. He'd seen it before, roving gangs chasing rumors of gold or revenge, leaving no witnesses behind. "How far'd you walk?" "3 nights," Eli replied. "No water since the creek dried up yester." "Why'd you come this way?" "Ain't nothin' but death out here." Eli gave him a long, unreadable look. "We saw smoke. Thought maybe you was cookin' somethin'." Mickl exhaled slowly. That was just the shovel clinkin' rock. Jonah, still chewing, looked at the half-dug grave. "Was it gonna be for you?" Mickl didn't answer right away. He stood and walked back toward it, looking at the raw earth, the empty canteen planted like a marker at the edge. "I lost everything, boys," he said flatly. "Used to have a ranch, small, but good. Had a woman, real kind one. They burned it down. Took her. I spent a year chassin' revenge. Found nothin', just graves and ghosts. Figured there weren't nothin' left worth breathin' for." There was a long silence. The only sound was the wind scratching over dry stone. Eli stood. "Then maybe we came just in time." Mickl turned sharply. "What you mean?" "You was about to leave," Eli said. "But you left your shovel sticking out. That's not how a man finishes. That's how a man pauses." Mickl stared at the boy, puzzled. "You ain't done," Eli added. Jonah tugged at Mickl's sleeve, looking up with wide eyes. "Can we stay?" Mickl opened his mouth to say no, to tell them. He had nothing, no water, no food, no shelter. He was a broken man with a grave and a shovel and nothing else. But the words caught in his throat, because something stirred inside him, a memory, maybe, of the way his wife used to look at lost animals and say, "If the Lord sent it to your doorstep, you take it in." He looked at the grave one last time, then at the boys. "No one's comin' out here to save us," Mickl said slowly. "Ain't no angels in the desert." "We ain't a skin for angels," Eli replied. "Just someone who won't leave us." The sun dipped lower. The shadows grew long and strange. And Mickl, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel so alone. "Come on," he said, motioning for them to follow. "There's a dry shack 2 miles west. Might be a rain barrel there, if luck's kind." Eli nodded and took Jonah's hand. The boys fell in step behind Mickl, leaving the half-dug grave behind them, forgotten for now. Maybe death could wait. By the time they reached the old shack, the sun had slipped behind the hills, and the desert turned from orange fire to bruised violet. The shack was barely standing, its roof slanted, like a drunk's hat, and one wall bore a pattern of bullet holes that told stories better left untold. It had once been a trading post, Mickl remembered, before the trail dried up and men stopped coming this way. Now, It looked like it might collapse with a hard sneeze. Mickl pushed the splintered door open. The hinges creaked loud enough to wake ghosts. Inside, the air was dry and musty. There were broken crates, an overturned table, and in the corner a barrel. "Pray it's got something," Mickl muttered as he staggered over, unfastened the lid, and peered in. His eyebrows lifted. "Water," he whispered, more to himself than the boys. It was only half full and dust-covered, but still clean enough. He dipped the tin cup in and handed it to Eli first, then Jonah. They drank with reverence, their lips wet for the first time in days. Mickl allowed himself a small sip and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "You boys ever sleep under a roof before?" he asked, glancing around the sorry room. "Not in a while," Eli said, walking to the broken window. "But this is better than sand." Jonah curled up in the corner near a faded saddle blanket and was already half asleep. Mickl set his rifle near the door, took off his hat, and leaned against the wall, knees pulled up. "You can rest now," he said to Eli, who kept glancing. "Outside, not used to sleepin' easy," the boy replied, "always thinking someone might come." Mickl understood that too well. But something in Ellie's eyes made him ask, "What did you see back at that rail camp?" The boy hesitated, then sat down across from Mickl. "There was fire," Eli said, his voice low, screamin'. "Some men rode in with red scarves on their faces. Mama grabbed us and ran. We hid in a feed cart." "Heard everything. Red scarves," Mickl repeated, his voice going hard. "You sure?" Eli nodded. Mickl leaned back slowly. He'd heard of them. Bandits, called the Red Veil Riders. Dangerous men, used to work under a bounty gang, then went rogue. They left trails of ash behind. "They're still close then," Mickl muttered. "You know, I know their kind," Mickl said grimly. Eli stared for a long second. "You were somebody once, weren't you?" Mickl met the boy's gaze, unsure how to answer. "Used to be. A rancher, a husband, a man who thought he could fix the world with grit and a Winchester. But it don't work like that." The shack fell quiet. Only the wind whispered through the boards. Eli said softly, "You could be somebody again." Mickl looked at the boy, surprised. "Why you care what I become? You saved us," Eli said, "even if you didn't mean to." The words landed deep. Mickl didn't reply. Later, as the stars blinked above the broken roof, Jonah snored quietly. Eli dozed off by the window, and Mickl stayed awake with one eye open and his rifle within reach. He'd meant to dig his grave that morning, but now, two orphan boys were asleep under his watch, and for the first time in a long while, the emptiness inside him didn't ache so sharp. When dawn cracked over the desert, it poured pale light through the broken roof slats. Mickl was already awake, sitting cross-legged by the doorway with his rifle balanced across his knees. He hadn't slept a wink. The boys stirred as the cold gave way to dry heat. Eli rubbed his eyes and looked around like he half expected the safety of the shack to have vanished overnight. Mickl nodded at him. "You sleep any?" "A little," Eli said. Voice rasped from thirst and old fear. "Jonah didn't wake up once. That's good." Jonah, still wrapped in the tattered blanket, blinked up at them and offered a shy smile. "Time to go," Mickl said, rising to his feet with a groan. His joints ached from the hard floor. "This place ain't safe if those riders are prowling," Eli frowned. "Where will we go?" Mickl lifted the canteen refilled from the barrel and slung it over his shoulder. "There's a canyon about 4 miles yonder. Used to be a mining camp there. Haven't seen a soul there in years. Good place to lay low." He hesitated before adding, "unless you got other kin to find." Eli shook his head. "Ain't nobody left." Mickl looked away, jaw tight. He knew that feeling too well, like the last rope holding you to the world had snapped. He stepped out into the morning glare. The boys followed, squinting against the rising sun. He scanned the horizon, his eyes adjusting to the brightness. That's when he saw it. Tracks. Fresh horse tracks, heading north to south, crossing no more than a few 100 yards from the shack. They hadn't been there the day before. Eli saw the tension in Mickl's shoulders. Riders, likely. Mickl said. He crouched, pressing his palm to the indentations in the sand. 3. Maybe for horses, not wild. He straightened and took a slow breath. We can't stay here. Jonah clutched Ellie's hand, his mouth trembling. They gonna hurt us? Mickl looked down at the little boy and felt a protective heat flicker in his chest. Not if I can help it. He checked his rifle only for bullets left. Not nearly enough if the Red Veil riders found them. We keep moving, Mickl said. Firmly, you boys stay close to me. No wandering, no noise. He led them south, skirting dry washes and old mesquite stands. Every so often he stopped to listen, scanning for movement or the sound of hooves. The silence pressed in, heavy and tense. By mid-morning, they reached a ridge that overlooked a narrow canyon choked with sage and the old bones of collapsed mine shafts. The wooden timbers were black with age, but one shack still stood, half sunk into the rock wall. There, Mickl said, pointing. It's not much, but it's cover. The boys stumbled behind him down the slope, kicking stones that clattered into the gully. Mickl winced at the noise but kept moving. Inside, the shack was cooler, the thick rock keeping out the worst of the heat. He closed the door and laid the rifle across a crate by the window slit. Jonah sagged against the wall, exhausted. Eli stood near Mickl, watching him with a quiet intensity. You really think they'll come? Eli asked finally. Mickl stared out the slit, scanning the empty canyon mouth. If they saw smoke last night or tracked our prints, they might. But we'll be ready. Eli studied him. You act like you've been in a fight before. Mickl looked him in the eye. I've been in plenty. Eli nodded like that was the answer he'd expected. He helped Jonah settle onto a folded tarp. Then he turned back to Mickl and said something that surprised them both. You're different than I thought you'd be. Mickl raised an eyebrow. How's that? I thought you was given up, Eli said softly. Men who dig their own graves usually do, but you didn't. Mickl swallowed against the tightness in his throat. I don't reckon I had a choice, not when you came wandering up. Eli gave a small, tired smile. Maybe that was the Lord's idea. Mickl didn't answer. He just looked out the slit again, scanning the bright canyon. He didn't know if the Lord had anything to do with it, but as the boys drifted to sleep again, he knew one thing for sure. If the Red Veil riders were coming, they'd find him standing, and he'd be someone again, even if only for these two lost souls. They came at dusk. Mickl spotted them first, a cloud of dust rising far down the canyon trail, low to the ground but moving fast. He steadied his rifle on the crate, jaw clenched. Stay low, he whispered to the boys. Eli pulled Jonah down. Behind a stack of rusted ore buckets, the little one whimpered, but Eli hushed him with a hand on his shoulder. Mickl kept his eye on the slit in the wall. 3 riders, red scarves tied around their faces, guns slung lazily like they didn't expect trouble. But Mickl had seen enough men die to know these weren't amateurs. The way they rode slow but alert told him they were hunting, and they were close. He turned to Eli. No matter what happens, you stay hidden. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Eli nodded once. You gonna stop em? Mickl didn't answer. He simply chambered around. The riders reached the canyon mouth, slowed to a walk, and fanned out. One dismounted and knelt to examine tracks near the ridge. The other kept their hands on their weapons, eyes scanning the high ground. Someone was here. The rider called. His voice bounced up the stone walls. Kids, maybe, and a man. Mickl narrowed his eyes. They came closer. One rider veered toward the shack. The others moved left, looping around the rock smart, trying to box and pray. "Don't fire unless you have to," Mickl whispered to himself. The rider nearest the shack dismounted. His boots crunching on gravel, he approached the shack's doorway, slow and quiet. Mickl could see the man's face now weathered, cruel, and smiling like he already owned the place. Mickl backed away from the window slit and crouched near the doorframe. Rifle raised. Then the hinge creaked. The door nudged open. Before the man could step inside, Mickl slammed his shoulder into the door and drove it into the rider's face with a sickening crunch. The man tumbled backward with a grunt, his revolver falling uselessly to the ground. Mickl grabbed it, pocketed it, and dragged the unconscious body into the shack. Eli stared wide-eyed. Jonah buried his face in his knees. "One down," Mickl growled. But the scuffle had drawn the others. One shouted from outside, "Frank, you all right?" Mickl peeked out. The remaining two were now galloping toward the shack, guns drawn. He ducked just as bullets tore into the wooden wall with a loud crack, crack, crack. Splinters flew. Jonah screamed. Mickl pulled Eli and Jonah into the back corner behind a pile of mining gear. "Stay down." He moved back to the window slit. Fired once, Mistan ducked as return fire split a board inches from his head. His breath was ragged. He had 3 rounds left. One of the riders dismounted and took cover behind a boulder, laying down suppressive fire. The other crept around to the shack's flank. To close. Mickl had no more time. He bolted from the shack's front, circling wide under cover of the canyon rock. Dust kicked up behind him as the hidden riders spotted his movement and fired, but missed. Mickl reached the side of the shack and waited. When the second rider crept around the corner with his rifle raised, Mickl tackled him hard. They hit the dirt, wrestling. The man was strong, but Mickl fought like a man with nothing to lose and something worth dying for. A punch to the jaw, an elbow to the gut. Then Mickl grabbed the rider's own pistol and fired point-blank. Silence. Eli peeked through a crack and saw Mickl stumble back inside. Blood on his shirt, but alive. "One left," Mickl said through gritted teeth. The last rider, now alone, called out from behind the boulder, "You ain't walking out of here, old man." Mickl picked up the dropped rifle from the man he just shot. "We'll see," he muttered. The canyon had gone quiet. Mickl pressed his back to the wall of the shack, breathing hard. Blood seeped from a gash on his side, nothing fatal, but deep enough to slow him. He tightened the old bandana around it, teeth gritted. Only one Red Veil rider left, hiding behind that boulder, maybe 20 yards out. He glanced toward the boys. Eli was shielding Jonah in the corner. Their faces were pale, but their eyes stayed locked on him. "You all right?" Mickl rasped. Eli nodded. "You bleeding?" "I've bled before." Mickl reloaded the rifle he'd taken from the second man. 2 rounds. He crept to the window slit again, slow and deliberate. Dust still hung in the air from the earlier gunfire, but the final rider was nowhere in sight. Then a glint of metal. Movement behind the ridge. Mickl fired once, missed. The shot cracked through the canyon and echoed like thunder. He ducked immediately, barely avoiding the bullet that answered. It punched through the shack's roof with a spray of splinters. "One bullet left," Mickl muttered. He turned to Eli. "No matter what happens, you take your brother and run. Head west till you hit the dried creek bed. Stay low." Eli swallowed hard. "I'm not leaving you. You will if I fall," Mickl said firmly. "That's not a debate." But Eli didn't budge. "We came to you for a reason." "I ain't running from that." Mickl stared at the boy. Courage wasn't rare out here, it was required to survive. But what Eli had wasn't just courage. It was conviction. Mickl gave a slow nod. "All right then. You watch that back wall." He might try circling behind us. He stepped outside, rifle low, using the shadow of the shack for cover. The wind had died down. The desert was holding its breath, and then Mickl saw him. The final rider was creeping toward the far side of the shack, thinking he was clever. His pistol was drawn, eyes narrowed beneath the red scarf. Mickl raised his rifle, but something shifted in the sand nearby just enough to draw the rider's attention. Jonah. The little boy had crawled out from the back corner, peeking through a broken board. He was trying to see if Mickl was okay. The rider turned toward him. Mickl didn't hesitate. He fired. The shot cracked like lightning and the rider collapsed into the dust, gun slipping from his hand, body twitching once before going still. Mickl exhaled, dropped the rifle, and rushed to Jonah. "You all right, boy?" Jonah nodded, wide-eyed and mute, then threw his arms around Mickl's neck and sobbed. Mickl held him tight, one hand on the back of his head. "It's over," he whispered. "It's over." Eli came out slowly, cautious, still carrying the pistol Mickl had given him just in case. "That was the last one." Mickl nodded. "Ain't no more comin'. Not today." He looked down at the 3 fallen bodies in the canyon dust. Red scarves, weathered skin, and the cold finality of men who had chosen violence their whole lives and met it in return. Eli walked to Mickl's side. "You saved us." Mickl let out a shaky breath. "No," he said softly. "You boys saved me." The wind returned, whispering across the canyon floor, pushing the dust over the bloodstains and spent casings. Mickl stood up, sore and bloodied, but taller than he had in weeks, maybe months, maybe since the day he lost everything. He turned to the boys. "We'll bury the bodies come morning. Then we head south. There's a small town called Willow Pass. Quiet place. Folks there still remember my name. Might even be a future there." Jonah sniffled and wiped his eyes. Eli gave a small nod. "You mean we go together?" Mickl looked at them both. "I mean we start over." Morning broke with a strange calm. The sun stretched its golden fingers across the canyon, warming the stones and lighting the dust that still hung in the air like memory. The 3 graves were shallow, but they were covered, marked with nothing but a few stones and the red scarves each outlaw once wore, tied to short sticks like warnings to the wind. Mickl wiped the sweat from his brow, standing over the last grave with a heavy silence in his chest. Eli stood beside him, arms crossed. Jonah was asleep again inside the shack, curled up beneath the blanket they'd brought from the first night. "You didn't have to bury them," Eli said, not judging, just observing. "No," Mickl replied, "but a man doesn't leave even. Devils for the buzzards." The boy nodded slowly. "You think they had people somewhere?" Mickl looked out across the canyon. Maybe someone's waiting, wondering why they never came back. Or maybe no one cared about them long before they ever picked up guns. Eli didn't say anything, but his eyes said plenty. He understood. Too well for someone his age. They packed what they could, canteens refilled from a hidden spring in the rocks, scraps of jerky found in one of the outlaws' saddlebags, and a small pouch of silver coins that Mickl didn't question the origin of. It would help get them started, and that was enough. By midday, they began the slow ride out of the canyon. The horse came from one of the riders, thin and skittish, but strong enough. Mickl let Jonah ride while he and Eli walked beside it, leading it through dry creek beds and over brush. They spoke little. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was earned, settled, familiar. By sunset, the hills gave way to open prairie, and in the distance, the outline of Willow Pass shimmered in the heat. A tiny town nestled between two sloping ridges, barely more than a handful of buildings and a water tower. Jonah pointed. "Is that it?" Mickl nodded. "That's it. Has a store, a school, and a doc who ain't afraid to work for beans. Eli narrowed his eyes. You sure will be welcome. Mickl hesitated. I was a different man last time I came through. Bitter, reckless, pushed folks away. Eli glanced at him. You're not that man now. Mickl smiled a little. No, I'm not. They reached the edge of town just as lamps were being lit. Folks looked their way, eyes cautious but not cold. A few recognized Mickl, nodded once, then went about their business. No questions, no judgment. He led the boys to an old barn near the livery stable and knocked on the sidewall. An old man with a gray beard opened the door. His eyes widened when he saw Mickl. Well, I'll be. Thought you were long dead. Almost, Mickl said with a tired grin. But these boys wouldn't let me. The man looked over Eli and Jonah, then back at Mickl. You bringin' trouble? No, Mickl replied. I'm bringin' family. The man grunted and stepped aside. Well then, best comin'. That night, they slept under a real roof with food in their bellies, clean water beside their beds, and a dog sleeping by the fire. Jonah laughed in his sleep. Eli slept with one hand under his head and the other near the window, still cautious, still alert. Mickl sat awake for a long time, staring at the flames. He had dug his own grave once, but that grave was empty now, because two orphan boys had wandered out of nowhere, dragging life back into a man who thought he had none left. And, in return, he'd given them something too, more than food, more than safety. He'd given them someone to walk beside.